Okay, so in the second part of this series overview of Art Asylum original series Star Trek figures, I'm going to be turning my attention to the aliens in this line. And whilst I wouldn't say this lineup is definitive, I do feel like Art Asylum got out all the heavy hitters for this series. I'll start by looking at one of the most unique figures in this line, and this is Vina in her Orion Slave Girl appearance. And as I noted in the first part of this series, I really love the packaging of this line. It's very colourful, it's bright, and it's moulded in such a way to make it really appealing and very three-dimensional. Likewise, I really like the reverse of the packaging as well. Aside from all the branding and the bright colours and the Star Trek insignia, it's quite cool how they have some photographic artwork really displaying these figures in all their glory. I think this is a really clever image right here. I think it's very evocative and it really, for me, sells the figures because this looks like so much fun. I think this is a great image and it's a little bit misleading in terms of the posability of these figures, but hey, you know, I think it's absolutely fantastic. I also really like that they're clearly having some fun with the packaging here and the retro feel of it. We can see here, obviously it's lining up the other figures in the line, but it also says for a Kirk style SmackDown, and they trademark that, which I think is really fun. And you might notice that in the top left hand corner it says boldly go back to a time where men were men, women were women, and aliens were green. Clearly there's a sense of humour here and I think it's really very effective, and it's definitely not the kind of thing I'm used to seeing on Star Trek toys. Now, when we get Vina out of her packaging, we can see straight away that she is a unique mould. Much like the Uhura from the previous video, she is completely unique in this line. There's no recycling of parts or moulds here, this is completely new. Art Asylum have been careful to utilise rubber on this figure quite a lot, and it actually works very, very well. So for example, her hair is very, very flexible. This rubber is perfect for this hair texture. It makes it flexible, it doesn't compromise the articulation, and it works really well. Likewise, they've used the rubber piece to wrap around the body as well as the dress, and again, this is very, very effective. It really supports the articulation whilst adding textures to the figure and gives it a more realistic kind of look as well, rather than being a hard painted plastic. Likewise, I love that each of the hands is uniquely sculpted. This is completely fresh, each one is different and has never been reused for any other figure. Also, I really like that they've gone to the trouble of applying different paint washes over the hands there. So you see there's two tones, there's a darker green and a lighter green, and they've actually taken the trouble to paint the fingernails a darker green, which I think is fantastic. I think the head sculpt here is pretty spot on as well. I think this is a really strong likeness. I think they've done a fantastic job with this. Sure, you can nitpick little pieces of it. Maybe there should be a slightly pinkish quality underneath the eyes, but that's just because of the application of the makeup in this show. I think if you were going to really pull this apart though, I think the only thing you could fault it for is to say that maybe the green is a little bit too dark. I think in the show it's a significantly lighter kind of green, but you know, that is nitpicking. I think overall they've done a really fantastic job of capturing the likeness of this character. Now, Vina's articulation is quite different from the other figures in this line. Sure enough, she does have a ball-jointed neck, which means of course she can spin her head from side to side and look up and down. Again, no hindrance there whatsoever from the hair because it is that soft rubber, so this is great. She also has the ball-jointed shoulders and she has that upper arm swivel there as well, which is great. She has the single-jointed elbow and she just has a swivel at the hand, at the wrist there, so it can't arch inwards outwards, it just swivels from side to side. Sadly, there is no ab crunch and there's no waist swivel, so I'm afraid that is all you get. However, you may notice that in the hips, she has two complementary joints. On one leg, she has just a straight swivel. On the other, she has a ball joint. This means that one leg can arch all the way up and out, whilst the other one can arch to the side, creating a lot of different dynamic dancing poses. She also has single jointed knees and a swivel at the upper thigh, and she also has a hinged ankle, although it cannot rock from side to side. Now, because she does have those complementary joints there, the swivel and then the ball joint at the hip, this does mean she can recreate some of these dancing poses, and this is absolutely unique in this line. We'd never see this before or ever again, in fact. However, it does come with a price. It means that you can't really stand her by herself. She does come with her own little stand, and you're always going to have to rely on this if you want her to be in any kind of pose, really, because she's going to fall over. One thing that you can do, that again you can't do with any other figure, is that you can put both these legs together so that her feet can stand side by side, and this is really very cool. However, again, without the use of the stand, she is going to wobble and fall over. But overall, I have to say, I think this is really, really great. I think it's a fantastic figure. I love that it has this experimental joint in there that is so contrary to what we see in this line. And I think it works really well as an experiment, and I think overall it's very effective. And that's definitely one of the things I really liked about Asylum when they had the Star Trek license, that certainly in the early days it really felt like they were pushing the envelope, trying to be creative and trying to do new things. And I think Vienna is a really standout example of them pushing the envelope a little bit further and doing something very different. Next up we have the Wave 1 Khan figure, and this is him of course in his red overalls. Now I have to say this is far from my favourite look for Khan, but it is probably the most predominant and the most iconic from the classic series. It's a very simple outfit and there's not an awful lot of detail, but Asylum have worked really hard to try and make it a bit more visually appealing. They've done an excellent job picking out all the little details and making something of them and painting them in quite nicely there. So wherever we can see a gold belt buckle or a little bit of an insignia on the chest or in the arms, they've applied this really nicely. And to complement them all, they've actually added a black paint wash throughout this figure that just gives it a little bit more of a grainy, lived-in kind of feel. It just gives it extra texture there, which is really cool. It stops it looking very plastically and looks a little bit more like we're looking at fabric. And as for the likeness, well, I feel once again they've done an excellent job of capturing the likeness of Ricardo Montalban. It may not be perfect, and I think a lot of that comes down to the paint apps as opposed to the mould itself. The sculpt itself is really solid, I think, but you can definitely get a really strong sense of the actor in this sculpt, and I definitely think it's one of the stronger ones in the line. As for articulation, well, again, he's got that fantastic bull neck joint, which allows him to spin his head up and down and look from side to side. Although he has a very stiff plastic collar, this doesn't hinder this movement at all, which is great. He's also got very strong, thick, ball-jointed shoulders, he has a swivel at the bicep, and he's also got a single-jointed elbow. He also has a swivel at the wrist, but again, it does not arch, it does not hinge inwards and out. Sadly, there's no ab crunch and there is no waist swivel. The hips are a straightforward hinge, so the legs can kick forwards and that's about it. They can't go backwards and they can't hinge out to the sides. There is thankfully an upper thigh swivel, and there is also a single jointed knee. There's also a hinge at the ankle, but again, there's no rocker there, they don't move from side to side. And whilst we're looking at Khan, they released this variant in a special 2-pack a little later in the line. Now I personally much prefer this look. This is his gold tunic that he wears to dinner with Captain Kirk, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. It looks really, really vibrant, it's very strong gold, it looks very rich and it's very nicely textured as well. And for me this better epitomises the character. Once again, Articulation have been careful to draw out every detail they possibly could of this costume and really make it pop in figure form. So it's very nicely painted. You can see there's a different paint wash going over the gold there, so it's got a little bit of a black paint wash to really highlight all the detailing in this tunic. It's bright and colourful and very, very effective. Now his articulation is much the same as the previous release, but there are some subtle differences. So first of all, he does have of course the ball jointed neck, and of course he can spin his head from side to side and look up and down. The collar once again is a very hard plastic, but thankfully it does not hinder the articulation at all here. He has the same ball jointed shoulders, he's got the bicep swivel, and of course the single jointed elbow. Likewise, he's also got the swivel at the wrist, and just as before, there's sadly no ab crunch and no waist swivel either. The key difference with this figure is that although he does have articulation in his hips, you can't move. The gold tunic, although there's a little bit, tiny bit of give in that plastic, it isn't really happening. Thankfully, he does have the upper thigh swivel and of course the single jointed knees. Likewise, he's got the hinge at the ankle, and once again these don't rock from side to side. So sadly he is quite limited when it comes to articulation below the waist. And when we put these figures side by side, we can see they've reused the same head sculpt, but the paint job is very different. The paint apps on this figure are a lot brighter, a lot more colourful and more carefully applied, and I think the skin tone is much more appropriate. Next up we have the classic Klingon Kang. Now I have to admit, I've never been a huge fan of the Klingons in classic Trek in terms of their design, but I really appreciate it in figure form. I think it actually looks fantastic and they've done a great job of converting me to really liking this design now thanks to the toys. There's a surprising amount of detail in this costume that I just never picked up on the show, but we can really see it here, and I think Asylum have done a fantastic job of pulling out these little bits and pieces. So, for example, we've got obviously the holster with his Disruptor in there, the gold pips, and the slight metallic wash over the tunic is really nice. Likewise, the top of the pants, again, there's a sort of black and gold kind of wash going through them. It's very nicely sculpted in terms of the little details, little dots that we can see there. You can feel that, so it's nicely textured. And then His boots look very shiny, they have that texture as if, they feel as if they might be PVC or leather, and it's a really good texture and it's a really great effect. And it's made me realise this design of this costume is actually a lot more complex and there's a lot more going on in it than I ever really picked up on screen. And of course he's also got the Klingon sash, and again that's nicely rendered. It's a rubber piece, so it's actually quite loose, so if you pick it up you can move it around, but it's also got the little detail in there of the insignia at the top as well, which is really cool. So this is very welcome. They've done a really nice job with this. Of course, if you wanted to army build, you could in theory remove the sash and you could just have your bog standard grunt soldier, I suppose. And I think the likeness here is pretty good. I think maybe the face is a little bit too elongated, but it is obviously a very distinct mold. It is meant to represent Kang. He's a unique Klingon, so it is very different. And I think, in the most part, they've done a good job. I think also his sash may be a little bit too dark, so again, it's nitpicking, but I think it's quite distinctive because his insignia really stands out as a result. But if you want to be super authentic, it's not quite right. And as I said, the sculpt itself just feels a little bit too elongated. Now he does follow pretty much the same base articulation as the rest of the figures in this line. So of course he has that fantastic ball jointed neck, which as you can see has no problems in terms of movement there at all, which is great. Of course, once again, he's got the ball jointed shoulders, but sadly you'll notice there is no bicep swivel at all. So it is just the ball jointed shoulder here and just the single jointed elbow. Once again, he's got the swivel at the wrist and there is no hinge there. But he does thankfully have a swivel at the waist. And you'll notice as well his tunic, it is a rubber piece once again. So again, it's got that little bit of extra texturing, more like the crew members. And much like Khan before him, his legs of course are hinged at the hips there, meaning they can kick forwards, but not a lot else. He does have those single jointed knees and again a hinge at the ankle there, but no swivel. He also comes with his Klingon blade as well, his dagger, which looks absolutely fantastic. There's not much in the way of paint apps, it is just sadly one silver piece, so it would have been nice if there'd been something on the grip, but nevertheless it looks really good in terms of the mould, and it fits into his hand nice and tight. He also comes with his Disruptor, and once again this fits into his hand perfectly, he grips it and holds it very, very nicely. Now Kang wasn't the first release, he came a little bit later. The first release of the Klingon in this line was in Wave 3 when we got Core. And as you can see here, Core had pretty much the exact same base body, and he just had a different head sculpt and a slightly different sash there, much brighter, all one colour gold. Now next up we have the Romulan Soldier. Now I'm really a big fan of this figure, and I always loved the Romulans in classic Trek. And as you can see, this is a really colourful villain. I love the design of it, I love the gold helmet and the sash there and the different colours that are going on. I think they've done a really nice job of bringing this to life in figure form. I should probably point out that he was actually a later release in this line, one of the last ones in fact, and by this point they had changed the branding and the packaging to this. Now this by no means is bad packaging, I think it's perfectly fine. I think it's really nice to have the logo there and the Enterprise firing its phasers. I think it's really cool and I still think it's quite colourful, but for me this is definitely not as strong as the previous packaging. I really love that packaging, as I've noted, and although this isn't bad, this is a notch down in my opinion. Now I think this figure is meant to be a generic Romulan soldier as opposed to anyone in particular. That said, he does bear an uncanny resemblance to this actor here. So whilst I don't think it's meant to be specifically this character, I think they've used this photo or this character as a photo reference for the sculpt. Now I could be completely wrong on that, and maybe this is generally meant to be that character, or maybe it's not at all. I think it's open to interpretation. I think for you and your collection, it's entirely up to you. At any rate, I think they've done a really good job with this sculpt. I think the helmet is fantastic, and I think the expression on the face is pitch perfect. And once again, much like with the Klingons, we can see that they've really taken up the challenge to really draw out all the detail in this figure. And I think, the texturing and the sculpt is fantastic. All these little individual triangles and the male effect in the tunic and in the trousers is individually sculpted. And then it's got this brilliant paint wash over it to just really enhance it and draw all that detailing out. And the result is that you feel like you've got a figure that's very nicely textured and highly detailed. The articulation scheme is once again pretty much what we've seen before, so the ball jointed neck allows the head to spin from side to side and up and down. He's got the ball jointed shoulders. This time I don't know whether it's just mine or whether mine are just stiff, but it's much more of a struggle to get them out. They don't seem to come out quite as far. Thankfully though, we do see a return of the bicep swivel here, which is great, and of course he's got the single jointed elbow there as well. And the figure originally comes with 2 sets of hands. He has his sort of human hands, for lack of a better term, and these swivel round in the same way as the others do. But he also comes with these swappable gloves. Now, you may notice these just pop off, and I'll talk about these a bit more in a moment. Meanwhile, he does also have a swivel at the waist. Once again, he has that hip swivel so his legs can kick forwards, but there's also a little bit of give for them to kick a little bit further backwards this time as well, which is good. He has the upper thigh swivel, and he's got the single jointed knees. He also has a little bit of extra articulation though at the top of the boot, which is great, so he can spin his calf from side to side as well. And then he's finally got a pin in the ankle there, allowing it to hinge up and down, but sadly it does not rock from side to side. So what's the deal with the gloves? Well, as I said, his hands are peg joints that slide into that hole there. The gloves, however, are not. So there is no joint for them to fit snugly in. They just go over the arm. As a result, they tend to pop off a little bit too easily. That said, surprisingly, they do hold his weapon perfectly well. So when he has his Disruptor, it fits nice and snugly into the hand there, and it looks great. And there's no danger of it slipping out. It fits really, really well. Now, sadly, aside from a Kirk as a Romulan figure that was released a little bit later, this is the only Romulan we would get in this line. I think it's a real shame because it would have been very easy to have the Romulan commander with the pink sash and the Mark-Leonard head. Would have been presumably fairly easy to produce, and it would have been a great one to have in here, so it's a real shame they didn't actually get around to making it. Last, but by no means least, we have the Gorn. Now, it's no secret that Arena is probably my all-time favourite episode of classic Trek, and the Gorn is my favourite alien. I love the design of this alien. I think it's absolutely fantastic, monstrous, scary, and looks properly alien to me. So I think it's weird that he's never really returned in the series in any of the other incarnations so far. So in terms of his likeness, how have they done? Well, I think they've done a pretty much perfect job here. I think the sculpt perfectly captures the Gorn. I think, yeah, this is pretty much spot on. I can't imagine it being much better than this, really. I think they've done an absolutely fantastic job. Once again, the paint apps, the texturing is perfect, and whilst the upper tunic is solid, the skirt piece at the bottom there is flexible to support the articulation, which is great. The sculpt, unsurprisingly, is completely unique. They haven't reused any pieces, and they've done a fantastic job with it. And they've really tried to bring out every detail they can in this monster. And yeah, the paint apps are perfect, I think. So I think they've done a really wonderful job. There's multiple paint washes going through this to make it look really realistic, and I think they've done a fantastic job with it. He does, of course, once again follow the same articulation pattern as the other figures in this line. He has the ball jointed neck, allowing him to move his head from side to side and up and down. The collar is a thick, hard plastic piece, so there is a little bit of restriction there because his neck is quite thick. But again, as you can see, he's still got plenty of range of motion there, nothing to complain about. He's got the ball jointed shoulders, sadly no bicep swivel, but he does have the single jointed elbow. And again, he has a swivel at the wrist there, which is quite nicely disguised by the sculpt. Now, there's no ab crunch, of course, but I suspect there might be a swivel at the waist. Now, I can't get mine to move, and I'm not sure if that's actually stiff, but there is a line there that makes me think this might be movable, so let me know if you've got yours to work, or whether I'm wrong. One key difference with this figure though is that he does have ball jointed hips, which is great. So if you lift his tunic up there, you can see that not only has he got the ball jointed hips allowing his legs to kick out to the side, but he's also got the ability to spin his leg as well, acting as a thigh swivel effectively. He's also got the single jointed knee as well, and of course he's got the hinge at the ankle. So in summary, I mean, there's been many different versions of the Gorn in toy form and many different scales across the years, and they've all been pretty much good, to be honest, but I have to say this one I think takes the biscuit. I think for me this is the best version of this character in any scale. So there you have it. There is my overview of the aliens from this line. I think, you know, hopefully you would agree that this is a pretty fantastic collection of figures. Now, by no means is this definitive. There's other aliens that we could have included, you know, Bele, the Charon, for example, or Talosians would have been really cool. Hell, even a Mugato would have been great. Nevertheless, these are the main aliens that we associate with this show. Klingons, Gorns, Romulans, and of course, Khan. I'm really happy with what we got here, and I think they've done a fantastic job with pretty much all of them. For me, these actually stand up a little bit better than the crew in some cases. So overall, a surprisingly fantastic collection of figures to get. So if you haven't got them, I strongly suggest you pick them up. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.